Coming at you from the ATL, from inside the paint and beyond the arc. This is Nothing But Nest, your Atlanta Hawks podcast. Now, here are your hosts, Deshaun Tate and Caleb Johnson.
Welcome into Nothing But Nest, episode 38. We come to you guys at a really important time for the Atlanta Hawks as they are just one step closer to wrapping up the regular season, heading into the play-in tournament. All of those things have been finalized to that point. It's all something that we're going to get into in this episode. Caleb Johnson here with my co-host Deshaun Tate, who is a little bit more under the weather than I am, thankfully, to this point. Well, not thankfully that you're under the weather, but
I was gonna say,
yeah. How are you, Deshaun?
I'm outstanding, dude. Caleb, how far back do we have to go before we got to a point where the Hawks were 2 games above 500? I mean, not that we're still there anymore, but how far back does that actually go? Like, that's kind of an intriguing question. I was kind of thinking to myself earlier. How far back does that go?
I was about to say, so it's 33 games or 75 days that the Atlanta Hawks went within at least one game of 500. So might have been one game above, might have been at 500, might have been a game below, but they kept that record for 75 days for 33 games. They then went 2 games above 500. So they actually went in the right direction, and things were looking relatively positive, I should say, to finish off the season. They came in to play a very short-handed Philadelphia team on Friday, and yet walk away with a 136-131 loss in overtime. Yes, Deshaun, this team made me stay at State Farm Arena for an extra, 30 minutes or so of like actual time versus, actual game time. That I had to be at that arena to watch them just kind of lackadaisically give it some effort, give it the good old try, but ultimately come up with a loss. I want to be positive, Deshaun.
You?
So, yes.
Wait.
Yeah.
Hold on. Pump the brakes. Stop the press. Caleb, negative Nancy Johnson, wants to be positive about something the Atlanta Hawks is doing, especially coming off of a loss against a team that has no Embiid, that has no Tobias Harris, that has no James Harden. I'm not done yet. That has no Tyrese Maxey, and God forbid Caleb Johnson is finding some optimism. I'm going to play the listen. I don't even know what the Mega Millions. I don't even play none of that. I'm going to play my numbers tomorrow. Like actually today after midnight. But I'm going to play. I'm in addition to that, Caleb, I'm going to get my life right with the good Lord Himself, because I know He's coming back very, very soon when Caleb Johnson's in pretty uplifting spirits after what we had to unfortunately encounter on last night's game against the Sixers.
It is Easter weekend, so maybe there's it's a good thought
The
there.
resurrection,
For you
to,
good thought for you there to be in that kind of mindset. But no, when it comes to the Hawks, the reason why I feel like I'm going to spend this in a bit of a positive way is simply the fact of you can get caught up in the fact that yes, the Sixers weren't playing their starters. Yes, technically when the Hawks started this game, they had something to play for. However, at halftime, the Toronto Raptors were down by 20 points to the Boston Celtics, and Brooklyn had locked up the 6th seed. So it was pretty much like, did not matter win or lose this game for the Atlanta Hawks. It did not make a difference. I think the Hawks played like that, which could be problematic. I could see that. Like I could see the like having a fit, throwing your arms up in the air. and going, I can't believe that they lose a game like this. However, what have we been saying about this Hawks team for the majority of the season? You've actually been wanting to point out the fact of what's their record against the Charlotte Hornets?
Mhm.
1-3. I think there was a stretch that 5 of the worst teams in the NBA, the Hawks had lost to 4 of them, I believe, and I can't remember. Teams have jumped around record wise, and I don't know if that still stands. But the point being that this team is classically playing down to lesser competition and playing up to its more important competition. Well, guess what, Deshaun? Only the big competition is left. Am I saying that the Atlanta Hawks are going to win a championship? Absolutely not. But all of these meaningless games meaningless, I should say, all of these games against lesser competition that actually matter are gone. I mean, they're going to play Boston on Sunday, and we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. But that game does not matter. It's not going to make a difference, except for in the win or loss column, where the Atlanta Hawks could finish 41-41, a perfect 500 season, which honestly, it feels like this team is destined to do. But on the other hand, I don't know. Maybe there's just a different feeling in me that says it doesn't matter. The important games that are in front of the Atlanta Hawks are win or go home, or first round of the playoff against really difficult competition, which we've seen the Hawks play up to, and at least be competitive against. So I don't know. I'm feeling a little optimistic, Deshaun. I guess that's just yeah. Decided to surprise some people.
I've been getting my temperature checked so much these last few days. I'm almost ready to check Caleb Johnson's temperature to make sure he's feeling okay.
Yeah.
Make sure he ain't coming down with the same thing that I was. But when we start talking, it's already been not necessarily well documented, but as I just, kind of went down the list of names that did not participate in this game, especially considering it resulted in a loss for the Hawks. It's not even just about the fact that Philly didn't play its players. It's partially because of the fact that the Hawks did. And a big
Yeah.
piece of that, because everything that was at stake, here goes negative Nancy Deshaun Tate now, swapping spots with Caleb
Yeah,
Johnson.
there we go.
That, part of the concern with that is that it kind of seemed like because the Hawks were kind of playing for something, it kind of seems like they were trying hard, which even feels weird. We talk about the consistently inconsistent thing all the time, and you just really don't know what you're going to get out of this Hawks team. And we've been feeling this way since the beginning of the year, having some really, really good moments, great moments, looking like, okay, now finally, this is the team that shows up. Not that we've said this a lot, but finally, this is the team that shows up that we thought could contend for a top 4 seed in the East. But in most cases, it's been very disappointing, and people, majority of the consensus, I think, would agree that most diehard Hawks fans or Hawks Nation has been really looking forward to next year more than anything. A fresh, new, clean slate, new head coach, blah, 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 dot, 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 right? But what does it say, if anything, about the Hawks? Like, I'm always kind of curious to know. Remember to tweet at me and tweet at Caleb Johnson. That what is it saying about this Hawks team with the fact that they lost this game tonight without its players? Not only just lost the game, but had Andy Denny notebook time, 15-point lead. So
Mhm.
feeling like it was the concerns about not being able to close out games, and not just close out games, but against this team that nobody thinks Philly's a bad team. But when you start considering, the circumstances and everything else of who's not playing, that's certainly a concern. Um, I think the other piece of that, continuing to be negative Nancy, the other piece of that is that I see other concerning things that we have been talking about for far too long. There's been so many years. I feel like, three of the last five at least has really been about the Hawks being really bad when it comes to getting stops. Okay. Uh, Philadelphia shoots 50% from three. Speaking of shooting from three, the Hawks are the complete opposite. 30% tonight. How
Hmm.
desperately do the Hawks need? And that's my question to Hawks Nation is number one, uh, uh, you know, how desperately do how desperately do the Hawks need to be successful from three in order to advance? In that particular department alone, from the perimeter, getting stops, all of these different things, how much emphasis do you really put on their success being predicated based off of between getting shots stops, excuse me, which we know in playoff basketball, every possession is critical. There ain't nearly as much up and down, run and gun, transition. The game slows down. Every possession becomes more critical. And just shooting as poorly as they have all season from three, I would imagine that that's pretty concerning. And I'm not sure how long the Hawks really have. Now, I felt good about a lot of things in tonight's game, and granted, I should have. We should have. Um, but the end result is still the end result. And if not nothing else, at the end of the day, regardless of how much good you saw, because we've seen what Trey go off for, what is it, 27 and 20?
Yeah.
Record breaking stuff for him or whatever. I think this is also, I think I saw something, Caleb, and correct me if I'm wrong. It's never been done in NBA history outside of Mike and Pippen that a tandem or a duo has averaged both, talking about obviously Debo Murray and Trae Young, both averaging 20 plus points a game and 6 assists on the season a piece. Never has been done between two teammates except for Mike and Pip. So as much, optimism as that says, the end result is still the end result, and it still feels like a bad loss at the end of the day.
I think the one part of this, and this is honestly, it's one of those, depending on how you feel about me saying this, is whether or not I think you would be concerned about this loss. The team that I was watching tonight looked like a team that was going to the LA Fitness, was going to the AEBL and getting in a run. Just getting in a not really calling it not professional basketball would
Mm,
be rude. Like that would be incorrect. But this idea of going down the floor and just kind of like, all right, you take it. Oh, I see an outlet for Clint. Let me throw it up for him. Ah, I missed. All right, cool. Let me get on the defensive end and, let me dribble around, pull up a three. Ah, I didn't get it. Okay. Just like playing very free, playing very loose. It leads to some really impressive plays, some fun stuff that
mhm,
gets the crowd excited.
mhm,
Doesn't necessarily produce the efficient results, so you don't end up shooting very well. And then because you're still playing that loose style on defense, then you end up giving open looks, and when a team starts knocking down those looks, then they end up shooting 50% from three. So it's all of it's just um I feel like there is a level of concern with the idea of you need to, you know, whatever you practice is how you're going to play. And if you're getting outside of your game plan, then that's going to mess you up come time that the games like truly matter.
mhm,
In the same respect though, Deshaun, I kind of look at this as like they knew it wasn't necessarily meaningful basketball.
mhm,
And so they kind of were just more so giving the crowd what they wanted. And then they got to a point where Philly was just hitting shots, um, and was kind of like, oh man, all right, well. this one got away from us. And like that's really the response that I got because I talked to Trae Young after this game and was asking him specifically about the final play of the fourth quarter, where Trae gets the ball. I want to say there's like 9 seconds left on the clock that he comes up the floor. He said Quinn decided not to call a timeout and just let them go. Very similar to a game that we had earlier in the year when Nate McMillan said, "No, I'm not calling a timeout. I'm just letting it
Mm-hmm.
go."
Mm-hmm.
And Clint Capella came up to try to set a screen, but Trae said he saw guys trying to trap him, so he knew he was just going to end up running into it, so he waved Clint away. Then he ended up trying to dribble around, ended up with three guys around him, tried to get a shot up, but it was a shot clock violation. And the way that he was describing how all of that went down was just so much like I wanted to try this. I wanted to try that. It didn't all work. And at the end of the day, I knew we were going to overtime. So it was playing with something behind him, knowing like, well, if I mess up, we're just going to overtime. Um, that element of freedom, which could really concern people on the
Mm-hmm.
one hand, and at the same time, in a game that didn't necessarily matter, um, Trae opted for the shot that he took that didn't fall at the shot clock. They go into
Mm-hmm.
overtime, and then Philly runs away with things in overtime.
Well, not only that, but I think I saw a free throw or two from Trey, maybe just one down the stretch.
Yeah,
Um,
he missed one down the stretch, and this
yeah.
team overall was what 67%
Hmm.
from the free throw line.
Absolutely. And that's a big piece of it. But, I talked a little bit before about not only shooting from outside, but also how critical it is that they're going to have to play defense because, in so many of the past years, we talked about how poorly, Atlanta has been from a defensive standpoint. Um, and that's just what it is. That's a real thing. But, the other piece of that is, man, especially in the first half, I'm like, Atlanta's kind of putting something together on the defensive end. I mean, guys are flying around all over the place and looking good. I'm seeing rim protector John Collins. I don't know where that came from, but I'm really happy to see it. I think somebody went up and he like blocked their shot, like kind of cuffed it and caught it in
Hmm.
midair type of deal. But then later on in the game, there's this instance where it looks like a guy has completely cleared him and jumped over his head on a play, which was
And they
not a
called him for a
very,
foul.
which was really weird. However, I don't know if he was moving or not, but optically it looked really bad, um, for all accounts. But you know, I said, wait a minute. I'm looking at this box score and I'm like, Trace flying around all over the place. 4 steals for Mr. No Defense himself. I don't know. However, something else you have to take into account, and I'm going to get Caleb Johnson's opinion on this, and remember to go ahead and shoot us a tweet on how you guys feel about it. But which one do you think is the bigger deal here? Do you think it is the combination of the 20 assists, 4 steals, Trae Young, or the 9 turnovers, far too many, trying to lob the ball up, throw it over people's heads as the guys and the cameramen on the baseline are catching it? And there was just a couple of those that I thought was a bit much. But I definitely wanted to get Caleb Johnson's perspective on it. Definitely didn't help. I mean, 20 assists is 20 assists at the end of the day, and you got to tip your cap and give credit because that's just what it is. I don't care if you're passing the ball to Michael Jordan every game. I don't care if you're, passing the ball to the guys at the local rec league at the YMCA. 20 assists is 20 assists against competition, no matter how you want to look at it. Somewhat impressive. But then there's that 9 assists. I'm sorry, the 9 turnovers that sticks out like a sore thumb to me. And not only just, they're unforced errors, they're unforced turnovers. And they looked almost as bad optically as another guy, you know, putting all of his man parts in John Collins' face. Like that just didn't sit very well with me personally. Nonetheless, I don't know. What do you think, Caleb? Because we love the 20 assists, regardless of what the competition looks like. But the 9 turnovers, that one kind of stings a little bit.
I think the turnovers thing once again kind of gets back to this free play that Trey had in this game, that I think happened in games that do matter in this regular season. But I think that was part of what I'm talking about with him playing in the lobs that he was trying to throw that you talk about not landing, that sort of thing. Um, because there wasn't this like necessarily a super seriousness taken to
Hmm.
this game. It was just
Hmm.
kind of like a, well, we're not getting their starters, so let's just kind of go out here and play some summer league basketballs essentially, and I think that's how you end up with those 9 turnovers. However, you talk about the 20 assists, you talk about the 4 steals. I would like to give you a stat, Deshaun, that I think the people will really like because it's maybe ironic. I don't know. We'll see. I looked this up before we recorded. Trae Young's stat line tonight of 27 points, 20 assists, and 4 steals has not been reached since Trae Young's former coach, Nate McMillan, finished a game with 28 points, 20 assists, and 5 steals on January 25th, 1987.
Ironic and coincidental.
Like,
Very
just
ironic and very coincidental.
what are the odds, that because I did look, so John Stockton, I believe, had a game where he had 26 points
Okay.
with the 20 with the 20 assists and the 4 steals. That happened in like 1990. But 1987 is the last time that someone had at least 27 points to match Trae Young. The other person to do that, only other person to do that in the NBA since they started recording all of these stats was Isaiah Thomas in 1985 when he had, I believe, the same exact stat line of 27, 20, and 4. So just one of those interesting little tidbits that you go like, this isn't happening every day. And I did ask Trey about the career night with his assists. And he just kind of brushed it off as to, like he said, if I really focused on stats every night, I could do this a lot more often. But I'm just trying to get my teammates involved, and that's just how things turned out tonight. I was like, great, love that. I think I don't know. I think there's just so much that can be made of Trey, and we've obviously had all the opinions that come with his play, that come with his leadership, that come with everything. And yet sometimes I just want to sit back and be like, this dude's an incredibly talented player. He is, in my opinion, the best passer, maybe second best passer in the NBA currently, second to like Jokic, maybe. So I think it's one of those things you could debate. So getting to see him have a career night and a night that hadn't been achieved since his former head coach, I think it's pretty cool. It just would have been a lot nicer, and honestly, I think the conversation would have gone a lot differently had they gotten the extra, had it been 137, 136, we might be
Hmm.
talking about like, oh man, this team really slumped their way into overtime, but at least they figured it out. And
Hmm.
that's why I fall back on this. Like, it really just kind of feels like they knew this game didn't matter, and so they were gonna try, but there wasn't that competitive, like, this has to get done. And hearing
Sure.
Trae Young say, well, I knew I had overtime if I missed the shot. That's not Mamba mentality type stuff that he learned from, the days of Kobe and things like that, the days of Michael Jordan, so that's what makes me really lean on the fact of this game just wasn't that big of a deal to them. I just hope it doesn't um, that some of the bad tendencies they fell into, like you mentioned with Trey's turnovers, don't show back up when the game does matter. In just a few days in the play-in tournament.
Here's the other part, Caleb. First of all, if only Trey Young's buzzer beater at the end of what quarter? Was that going into the half?
That was to end the first quarter.
To end the
Also,
first. The only
sorry,
that would have counted.
I didn't mean to cut you off, but just
No, you're good.
one funny tidbit about that moment to end the first quarter. So Trey shoots the shot, and I thought it was good. I was like, "Ooh, nailed it!" And he turns around and looks at Tony Brothers, who's calling the game, lead official, who immediately waves it off. I mean, just no hesitation.
Didn't even think to look, didn't even go to the video
Nope,
board.
nope, just immediately waves it off. And Trey looks at him as if to like, I hit it. And then he sees Tony Brothers being like, nope, nope. And he turned around, he started laughing because it's been pretty well documented that Trey and Tony don't necessarily see eye to eye. And actually,
Sure.
Trey in a post game this season, because I remember I think I might have asked the question where Trey said something about like, yeah, I don't think Tony likes me. So Trey just like laughed as he walked away from that whole situation in the first quarter to the end of the first quarter, as if to be like, of course you waved it off. Like, of course you just assumed I didn't hit it at the buzzer. And he didn't. Like they reviewed it and it
Sure.
didn't go down. But yeah, you're right. Like that would have been the difference in the game in regulation. At least would have been nice
Absolutely.
to have that shot go the other way.
Absolutely. Of course. And the deficiencies that we see are real. Um, you know, I when I sit back and I look at this team, I don't want there to be too many more instances where I feel like we see the empty lobs. Sometimes I feel like some of those can be kind of expectant and telegraphed in terms of passes. I think people are starting to kind of figure that out a little bit. Um, but with that being said, um, I've got to put some optimism on it with you because we've seen a player, of course, you guys share the same last name, who has appeared to emerge more, to be considered a little bit more held accountable. Onyeka has had some, strung together some good performances and contributions over the course of the last week, 2 weeks, whatever, what have you, too. And sure, maybe he's not dunking on someone, but I feel like Jalen Johnson's um, activity and just extra effort getting, downhill or putting transition positions where he can go for some of the dunks. I mean, I feel like that's almost like becoming a regular appearance of something that we get a chance to see from him. But just, talking about his contribution down the stretch paired with AJ Griffin, who's, obviously the youngest guy on the team, but just, collecting your thoughts on the Jalen Johnson receiving, more minutes and growing into a slightly bigger role, or just a more, knowing what you can expect from him. Maybe not in all the other departments per se, but in this one, I felt pretty freaking good and pretty freaking confident on that. But between he and AJ Griffin, I think, this year you talk about seeing guys as just, taking a step in their pride and everything else. And last but not least, Sadiq Bey has to be a big part of this. I know we like to look forward to playoff and the seedings and the matchups and who's playing who and this, that, and the third. But there are some guys that you have to give some credit to, and they're going out there and they're playing hard, playing hard every single night. And certainly, Griff, and not to single anybody out, but certainly, Griff, and Sadiq Bey, these additions have been really huge for this team. especially one of the concerning factors that we've always had about them coming into this year has been primarily predicated on um, I guess just the consistency and just knowing what you're going to get from these guys, which I feel like I see the effort, but there's still a hole sitting right in the middle of, having talent on this team coming off the pine that I feel pretty confident to say if things get tight and somebody gets into foul trouble, you just insert this guy or that guy, and they can look somewhat significantly different. But it seems like every time that you start getting to a point where they're about to go on a run and they're on a roll and it's time to, believe and all of this stuff. Um, I see a lot of concerns and I see a lot of pros and cons. You just really don't know what you're going to get out of this playoffs, which I feel like every single year, and I got to bring it up, but it just sometimes NBA playoffs is starting to have a little bit more March Madness feel. There is some more unpredictability versus, what you think um, this team should look like. And as long as they're still playing, I tell people all the time, in order for you to in order for you to win it, you got to play for it. There's a lot of teams that's not in the Hawks position right now that's going to be watching from the lazy boy, the same way that we do. But even then, yet still, this is very much a team that if they get hot, I know we said that about everybody, but this one, if they find a way to get hot at the right time, this could be their way of shutting the mouths of a lot of people, mine included, that has its doubts and red flags and reservations about this team.
Yeah, I think the guys that you mentioned, the bench mob, as they like to
Mhm.
call themselves, with Bogey and Sadiq and Jalen and
Yeah.
Onyeka, those guys have really stepped up as of late, and I think as a group have really looked a lot better since the All-Star break. And there's a lot of different things that have kind of happened since the All-Star break that have been in more of a positive trajectory. And I know a lot of people easily want to jump on the bandwagon of like, oh, well, that's Quinn Snyder coming in, taking
Yep.
over, and really changing this thing. And I'm not saying that Quinn isn't making improvements to this team,
Impact. Mm-hmm.
but there's also an element of guys just finally hitting their stride later in the season than they were earlier on. And the bench has been that area. I know a lot of people are wanting to kind of do a little bit of revisionist history now, specifically with Jalen Johnson, where I've seen some conversation about like, oh man, should Jalen have been getting more minutes earlier in the season? No, because we saw some of that and it looked terrible. He would have really great moments, and then he would go on to have some really rough moments. And it was all about confidence, and he was too timid, and he was passing up shots. And yet Jalen was passing up shots like a week ago that, DeJounte Murray was getting on to him. And then he finally hit one and he pointed at DeJounte, and Quinn Snyder talked about it in the post game. That was happening like less than a week ago.
Sure.
And yet we've seen some really positive signs from Jalen Johnson as of late, so much so that I'm seriously considering, Deshaun, that I might need a Johnson Hawks jersey
Mm.
in my collection because I'm not embarrassed to have a Johnson #1 jersey in my collection. Like there was a point earlier in the year, I was too embarrassed. I would be embarrassed to go in public and wear that jersey. I'm not
Yeah.
right now because the man's playing really well and he has earned everything that he's gotten. And I think there's just been a level of confidence with him, and a confidence with that bench mob group in general, of Onyeka Kongwu, who didn't do it against the Sixers, but has been getting to the line really consistently, knocking
Yeah.
down his free throws, is at least giving teams the possibility that he could knock down a corner three, so they've at least got to consider him when he goes out to the perimeter. Um, Sadiq, obviously, with his 3-point shooting, has been a pretty great boost, and then Bogey, same. And he's been great when he's had to step into the starting role because guys have been out sick or guys have been out injured or whatever it might be. And then the other element of this is that you had talked about is John Collins. I mean, John Collins is shooting like 45% from three, I believe, in the
Yeah,
last,
yeah.
10, 11 games. So he's just got a different level of confidence that he didn't have earlier in the season. I don't know if the man, got an injection in his messed up finger and got
Yeah.
things fixed a little bit better or what. And even when we've talked to him about it, he's really not let us in on what the big secret has been, is what the change has been. I think
Hmm.
he kind of wants to just leave it up to like, yeah, I'm just, I'm getting good looks and I'm knocking them down kind of thing. But it's like, feels like just something had to have changed.
Something
Um,
had to.
but that's why like I feel pretty confident about this Hawks team going into this postseason. Once again, not that they win a championship or anything,
Sure.
but that they get out of the play-in round. Um, because for them to lose the play-in
Hmm.
round, they would have to lose at Miami and
Hmm.
then lose the second game, which would be either Toronto or Chicago.
Okay.
The odds of the Hawks losing a, you know, game one of a postseason game, in which is going to be difficult against Miami, and
Yep.
we'll get into
Yep.
that. There's some things that are up against them, but
They owe
B,
them.
to lose a second game in the postseason that would then be at home if it were to happen. I just don't see that happening. With combined with all the positive things that we've been talking about when it comes to this team, throwing this Sixers game out the window.
Hmm.
Like there were some more positive signs. There were things that were more consistent coming into this one. The three straight wins, the John shooting well, just all of these different elements have me in more of a positive mindset than otherwise would be. There is one game though between now and getting to the play-in tournament.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
do you view it in the same like I guess how do you stand, Deshaun, on this whole, hey, we need to play a really good game going into the postseason, or hey, this game does not matter at all. Let's just go out there, don't get hurt.
I think it's a combination of both. One thing that you have to do is you have to at some point say, hold on, wait, where's the pride? Um, outside of that fact, the sky isn't falling. Things can be worse. Did they and get to the expectation? Did they exceed the expectation, let alone get to it? No. Um, but you know, I saw something, a notification come across my phone today that had Chicago Bulls fans sleeping at the game. How dare you disrespect basketball in that way? That's just a personal opinion,
Yeah.
but um, they have the ability to be okay. Like they are the team that could maybe, I'm not gonna say beat anybody in the East. Obviously, I'd be a fool to say that or even believe that. And despite whatever shakeups that it is that I think that we're gonna see, um, it's just something to to really think about because we know that if not nothing else, this team has history of being able to string and pull things together at the right time for the betterment of the team, hence why they would advance. And that's the goal. We all understand that. That is what you aspire for when you're, the whole nine. Um, but it's going to be a little bit more than talking about it. You're going to have to put forth, some action. And between, just playing better defense for starters, I think that that's a very big and important piece, if I'm just being honest.
I'm kind of curious, and this is my like conspiracy brain kind of going out there,
Okay.
that I'm very curious if the Hawks just try to give as little away to Boston come Sunday. And I don't know if that means sitting guys or resting guys, because I don't really know that they want to rest guys.
Sure.
At least, give them good first half minutes. I don't know what would happen in the second half. But the reason being is that if this team wins on Tuesday against the Heat,
Hmm.
they would then be seeing the Boston Celtics in the
Yep.
first round. So Boston's going to be sitting everybody, so
Yep.
you don't want to give them much of anything either. Also, have you seen this whole thing with Jaylen Brown and his hand?
I've heard, about it. Obviously, keeping my ears to the streets and whatnot. But I did hear
Yeah.
a little bit about a hand or a finger injury.
Yeah, so he's got 5 stitches he had to get on his hand after cutting his
Mm.
hand on a vase while watering plants. I mean, first off, when I heard that, I thought, what were
Yeah.
you
Okay.
really doing?
There you go.
You know,
There you go. There you
um,
go.
what were you really? Um, it could have been a glass object, but was it a vase that you were watering plants with? I don't know. But even
There
if
you
you
go.
were, really strange injury to have happen, and really bad timing, honestly, for the Celtics, to be missing, your second best player,
Sure.
come playoff time. So I think that's one of those things you're definitely going to have to keep an eye on, as the first round of the playoffs are a week from when this episode will be releasing. So
Okay.
it's not like there's a whole lot of time for Jaylen Brown to heal up. Now,
Sure.
granted, I'm sure they're probably planning on, like, hey, even if he has to miss part of the first round, it's just the first round, and we should be able to breeze through this. Right? That's why,
Mhm.
that's what I'm starting to be like. All right, I don't know. Like, things are really starting to work out if the Hawks take advantage of all of this. Now, quickly before we get out of here, because I know we'll have more time to spend on this to discuss
Mhm.
specifically this Miami Heat series. But how are you feeling about the Hawks going to Miami to play the Heat for a game, that could put them into the first round of the playoffs or send them to have to play the 9-10 seed, a Miami Heat team that they only beat once this season, and that was
Yep.
at home. The Hawks have not beat the Miami Heat since March 2nd, 2021. Yeah, in Miami. Like, that's the,
Mm.
you know,
I mean,
are they due?
we're essentially Caleb now looking at this from a different perspective, or whatever the case may be. Playing the guys and whatever, what have you. I say you play them. You can limit it if you want to, or whatever the case may be. But
Against
I don't like
Boston.
the right. But I don't obviously don't think that anybody's you know gonna be taking Atlanta over Boston. Obviously, depending on who's playing, who's in the lineup and who's not. But this Hawks team, they it's simple. They owe Miami one. They owe them one.
Yeah.
They really owe them one. The way that they, excuse me, shut Trey down and left him with very limited options and forced him to not be better, but just to be different, and what that leadership role, amongst other things, are. I'm gonna be really interested to see where the chips fall on all of this, because I know enough about Trey to know that he gets he gets pretty pissed off um, when people don't believe in him, when people doubt him. That's how he got to this point, and we all get that. But in that same breath, there's a reality that is over here as well. So um, I hope they can close it out in Boston. At least give me 200, or I'm sorry, 500, or above. That's been the really difficult thing to do so far this year. But who knows? Uh, you know, Players can get hot, guys can go on runs, and you never really know exactly what you know. You know what it takes to be successful, but it's going to start with those on-ball defenders like Trey and, obviously DeJounte Murray is more on the elite status in terms of that particular category. But if they're going to want to win, they're going to have to find a way to get stops because I really do believe that everything else will follow and fall in place at that time. But first, you have to address this thing, and this is a pretty big thing.
Make sure you give us a follow on social media. My guy Deshaun Tate at Tate's Take Hoops. You can give me a follow on Twitter at ATL Johnson 18. Go like, subscribe, all of that fun stuff when it comes to our podcast, Nothing But Nest. When we speak again, we'll know exactly where the regular season will stand when it comes to Boston, and we'll get to do a little bit of figuring out what this Hawks team is going to do come postseason time, and if they can really make it all work. You look like you had something you wanted to add, Deshaun. What's up?
I want to throw in this one last piece before we wrap up.
Sure.
Good, good friend of mine, and God rest his soul, because I want to make sure that I'd be remarkably remiss if I didn't mention it. Sekou Smith. We have a new
Yes.
Sekou Smith recipient award winner. Now, obviously, the first year going to John Collins. Unfortunate death for my buddy Sekou, but second year to Kevin Herter,
Yep.
and this year now to Clint Capella. Three outstanding pieces as individuals that would represent what Sekou Smith has put in place, and I just think that is really awesome, and wanted to applaud the Atlanta Hawks for making sure that there was some it was still recognizable in a pretty big deal as well, and for my dude Sekou, so I just had to make sure that part got mentioned, because when you start talking about leadership and amongst other things, that was something that Sekou certainly represented for much of the Atlanta Hawks basketball club community. So just definitely want to give him some credit and congratulate Clint Capella on being the recipient.
Yeah, it's actually my first year that I got to vote for the award.
Oh,
They didn't consider me in the last couple of years, but it's fine.
okay.
But no, I got to vote this year, and I did. I voted for Clint Capella, and I tweeted out a little bit. Part of my reasoning is I think Clint's been great this year
Mhm.
in being genuine and being honest, being
Mhm.
forthcoming.
Not cheating the
Um,
game. Hmm.
yeah, and like whether it sounded good or not, like whether it was to the benefit of his teammates or not, I think sometimes it was motivation when Clint would say things. I specifically remembered the day that Nate McMillan was fired, and we spoke to some of the leaders of this Hawks team. Clint Capella was one of those guys who spoke, and I just remember the genuineness that he had, and he was just honest about where they stood as a team, what needed to change, and what he hoped to see. And I think just that relationship with us, the media. We I know we don't always need to know everything that's going on,
Hmm.
but when you give us genuine responses and detailed information that we can
Hmm.
then talk about your team, talk about your game in a more enlightened way, because we understand what you're thinking and what's going on situationally. Other than just telling us that we just didn't play good this game, and we're gonna figure it out. And so yeah, that's something I've always appreciated from Clint, and specifically we got from him this season. So I 100% with you. I'm glad you made sure that we mentioned the Sekou Smith Award for that recognizes that player relationship with the media, and Clint's done a great job of that this season. And we'll see who's got things in store for coming next season, because it's bounced around a little bit. I feel like it could always go to John, quite honestly, just based on how he's typically pretty genuine.
Mm-hmm.
But this was a bit of a rougher season, obviously, for John with all of the trade stuff going on. And so
Mm-hmm.
it was interesting, just to kind of get that relationship with Clint this year. But
Yeah. I love
that
no, I love everything about that. Caleb has been real. We made it through. We're right there. We're at the end of it. I still need to let it be known that Hawks fans need to come out, be loud, wear your red or just whatever. This is not necessarily uncharted territory, but you're prepping for Boston and you're getting ready to start prepping for what appears and obviously looks like it's going to be Miami. Um, they own Miami. I think that they ought to. I think they need to make sure that they come out looking like a different team than we've seen all season. Because while Miami has certainly had its inconsistencies within itself, it's going to be very critical for the decision making and preparing your mind for the physicality, because that's just the type of brand of basketball that they play.
And with that, for my co-host Deshaun Tate, I'm Caleb Johnson. Thank you for watching us on YouTube and listening to Nothing But Nest.